My fence collapsed in seconds. 1 minute, it was standing there, holding back the cold. And the next, well, you ever see a snow plow hit a fence at full speed? It's not a slow-motion, movie-style crash, I'll tell you that. Metal shrieked, wire went flying, and before I could even yell, the gate was gone, and a parade of dump trucks was already barreling in. They dumped filthy, gray snow straight into my pasture, like my land had turned into some kind of municipal landfill overnight. Salt, slush, every road chemical you can imagine, stuff you wouldn't want near your boots, let alone your livestock, spilled out in steaming, dirty heaps. My bulls freaked out. You ever see a 2,000-pound animal slip on frozen ground? One slammed into the feed trough. Another bolted, wild-eyed, steam exploding from its nostrils. I was yelling myself hoarse, but nobody in those trucks cared. Engines kept rumbling, gears grinding. Behind me, my wife stood in the barn doorway, wrapped in 3 coats, shivering. Not from fear from the cold pouring in, now that half the winter shelter was buried under all that junk. And then she showed up. I'll never forget that red BMW, purring up to the ruined fence, barely a fleck of snow on it. She stepped out, immaculate boots, coat buttoned all the way up, and folded a piece of paper and started reading like she was announcing a new law. Emergency Winter Authority, she said. Temporary land seizure for community safety. She didn't raise her voice, didn't look at the wreckage, just waved her hand and told the drivers to keep dumping. She introduced herself as the HOA president. If you're picturing someone friendly, don't. She spoke like a regulator, like she'd issued 1,000 orders and never needed to hear what anyone else thought. Cold, crisp, punitive. She said, "This is just the beginning." And sure enough, snow poured in thicker and faster, as if my land had already stopped belonging to me. She laid it all out, matter of fact. The subdivision, she claimed, needed a snow disposal. Site roads had to stay clear. Plows needed somewhere to dump. And, wouldn't you know it, my pasture was now the most efficient solution. There was paperwork, of course, pages and pages. I'd never seen any of it. What she didn't mention was the contract seasonal snow management deal tied to the HOA. Mid-7 figures, up for renewal every year if the site stayed operational. The longer my land stayed buried, the more money she made. I told her, this is active ranch land. These animals won't survive the runoff. She barely looked at me, just glanced over the herd, then back at the barn where my wife was still standing, cheeks red, hands shaking. You should have adapted sooner, she said. Winter doesn't wait. By the second day, snow piles were higher than the fence posts. Every few hours, another load of road sludge hit the pasture. Salt burned through the grass. Ice crusted over the feeding lanes. The bulls wouldn't even go near the troughs anymore, circling wide, snorting at the noise and the stink. One young bull went down hard near the runoff ditch, legs scrambling in the mud. I dragged him clear, my own boots sliding, his flank bleeding where the ice had cut him. Another bull refused to eat, pacing the fence line, eyes locked on those trucks. I tried calling the number on the plow. No answer. I flagged a driver down, told him this was cattle land. He didn't even pretend to care, just shrugged. I'm following orders. That afternoon, a notice appeared, zip-tied to my gate. Violation interference with emergency operations. Daily fines pending compliance. I ripped it down and laughed, bitter and tired. By nightfall, it got colder. Wind shoved snow sideways into the barn, and my wife and I worked in silence, dragging hay through knee-deep drifts, trying to calm the herd. She moved slower than she used to, hands shaking as she tied the stalls. This isn't safe, she said. And she wasn't talking about the weather. The letters started arriving next morning. Certified envelopes, official logos, photos, close-ups of my fence, my own cattle, like evidence for a trial I'd already lost. The HOA claimed I was blocking a public safety corridor, said my land had been designated for emergency use. Everything was written so carefully, like they wanted to sound reasonable while threatening to ruin me. By noon, a second notice. Owner entry prohibited within marked boundaries. Bright orange flags staked through the pasture, lines cutting across the feeding zone. When I crossed one, my phone buzzed another fine, logged automatically. That's when it stopped feeling like a dispute and started feeling like a trap. I pulled up the county records, standing out there in the cold with numb fingers. The easement file looked wrong. Dates didn't line up. A temporary authorization had been added just days earlier, backdated, approved without a hearing. Every document pointed back to the HOA office. Every email had the same signature. And there it was, her name, stamped clean at the bottom. HOA President. That night, more trucks rolled in. My bulls bunched together at the far end of the pasture, steam rising off their backs in the floodlights. Feared is that it compresses animals, makes them wild. Someone in the HOA was counting on that. The real answer came from a contractor who didn't know I was listening in the phone by his truck, complaining about overtime. He called a gold mine, said the site wasn't temporary at all. If it stayed active, the contract auto-renewed. Big money. I spent the night digging through filings, looking for the numbers nobody said out loud. There was $2.8 million. That's what the HOA stood to make, turning my private pasture into a permanent dumping ground for surrounding developments. It all funneled through shell vendors, partnerships, land use conversion sleglies, hiding a simple fact. My land was being stolen, line by line, in black and white. And then I saw EDA parcel map revision. My land, reclassified as non-agricultural. I drove to the cemetery the next morning, just needing air that didn't taste like salt and diesel. Snow around my son's headstone had been disturbed tracks where there shouldn't have been. The small wooden cross we placed after the funeral snapped in half, shoved into a drift. My son had worn a badge, believed in rules, in paperwork. Years ago, he filed a report about HOA fund misuse. It cost her a fine, a public reprimand. Now I finally understood. This wasn't about snow, it was about settling a score. She was willing to bury my land, my livelihood, and my family just to win. At the county office, the clerk barely blinked when I explained. She scrolled through filings, leaned back, asked, "Did you authorize this winter conversion?" She pointed to a document, me name, my parcel, my signature. Only it wasn't mine. The loops were wrong. Someone had forged it. Sure, I'd never check. This bypassed public notice, the clerk said. Emergency authority can't do that. Not for land conversion. She stamped the file, slid it across the counter. Outside, the plows roared past, headed for my place. I called a land use attorney. He didn't sugarcoat it. If this holds, he said, they're not just dumping snow. They're taking your land by force. And whoever signed this, if it's a forgery, they're exposed. By the time I got home, county trucks were parked at the gate. Inspectors, not hostile but not friendly either. They measured runoff, took samples from the snow piles, photographed the salt burn creeping toward the creek. One of them pulled me aside, said, "This much road waste on farmland violated multiple codes, especially with livestock around." That afternoon, another HOA notice. Continued resistance will result in asset seizure. They weren't bluffing anymore. That night, a hard freeze locked the salt into the soil. One bull couldn't stand. Another panicked, kicking the stall walls, noise echoing through the barn. My wife sat on a bale of hay, rubbing her hands together. "How far will she go?" she whispered. I didn't answer. By then I knew she'd already gone past the point where consequences mattered. So I sent the forged filing to a few other homeowners people who'd complained quietly for years. Folks who paid their dues and assumed someone was watching the money. They started asking questions. Why was a temporary snow site listed as a renewable asset? Why were vendor payments going through shell companies? Why did the HOA president's personal account match the disposal fees? By morning, the HOA email system lit up. Then silence. That afternoon, a notice went out. Emergency HOA meeting mandatory. The timing wasn't subtle. She knew her filings were unraveling, that the county was watching. Instead of backing down, she doubled down. As dusk fell, plows rolled in, louder, closer. Her red BMW cruised the fence line, headlights cutting through the snow. She didn't get out. Loudspeakers crackled, her voice echoed across the pasture. This property is under emergency control. Any interference will be documented. The bulls tensed. The sound hit them wrong, vibrating through frozen ground. I yelled for her to stop. She didn't. She circled the pasture, loudspeaker blaring, provoking chaos like she wanted something to happen. My wife grabbed my arm. "Don't," she said. I just watched bulls frozen, eyes fixed on that car. Then my phone buzzed. A final message. "Tonight this ends, one way or another." The community center parking lot was half buried in snow. Plows idled outside. Residents rushed in, breath fogging the air. She arrived last, her BMW stopping right where the fence met the pasture. Inside, she took the podium, skipping the agenda. "This session exists for one reason: resolve an obstruction that threatens public safety." She clicked, a remote maps appeared, my land shaded and relabeled. "This property is being converted permanently, effective immediately." But before the room could explode, county officials walked in, and behind them, a man with a badge. She didn't see him, she was too busy smiling, confident as ever. I walked up and handed the clerk a folder. She opened it. The forged signature appeared on the screen. My name wrong, loops, wrong hand. Then the financials, transfer after transfer, money routed out. Emails, internal instructions to keep the site open at all costs. And the cemetery photos, the snapped cross. The room went dead silent. The official leaned forward and asked, "Did you authorize these filings yourself?" She tried to bluster, "This is harassment. He's unstable." That's when the man in the back stepped forward. "Calm, even, ma'am, we're going to need you to stop." She bolted for the window, not the door, shouting orders through the loudspeaker, panic in her voice. The bulls reacted, surged forward. Metal shrieked, the BMW crushed under muscle and momentum. People ran outside. Phones up, shouting, chaos. County officers pulled her back, cuffs out. "You're under arrest." The pasture finally went still. The car sat half buried in snow, silent. There was no cheering, just a heavy relief. Inside, people started talking, apologies, gestures, small kindnesses. My wife got a cup of coffee, a blanket. The bulls calmed, the panic draining out. The board members looked small, the room suddenly too big. Someone read the official notice. Emergency authority revoked. Land use conversions frozen. Contracts suspended. The HOA placed under outside review. My land registered. Remediation ordered at the HOA's expense. No more shortcuts. No more hidden signatures. Engines started outside, different trucks now, hauling away snow. The fence was reset, tape removed. The land looked bruised, not buried. A volunteer handed me the broken cross from my son's grave, cleaned and wrapped. We set it back that night. Out in the pasture, the bulls just watched, unbothered, now that the rules made sense again. My wife squeezed my hand. "It's over," she said. I watched the snow settle into the ruts, softening everything. The land didn't need speeches or promises, just a little time to heal. I turned off the lights, let the pasture disappear into the storm. Winter tried to bury us, but all it did was cover the tracks of the people who thought they could. Looking back, what mattered wasn't the wind or the snow. It was how close everything came to going wrong. If I'd let anger take the wheel, if I'd tried to meet force with force, this story would have ended with regret. What changed the outcome wasn't toughness or cleverness. It was slowing down, documenting everything, letting the process work. There's a line I didn't cross, even when it felt personal. Standing up legally isn't the same as escalating emotionally. One is steady, the other burns hot, leaves scars. If you ever find yourself in something like this, trust me, the smart moves don't feel dramatic. Keep records. Take photos. Ask questions in writing. Let silence do some of the heavy lifting. And when it gets too big, bring in people whose job it is to see what you can't. What really holds a community together isn't power, it's restraint. Rules only work when everyone, even the people in charge, respects them. If they don't, someone has to step up and check it. Out there, beyond a window, my fence stands again. Not as a wall, just as a boundary that finally makes sense. So let me ask you, where's the line between defending what's yours and becoming what you're fighting against? If you've ever had to stand up to power or had something stolen right out from under you, I want to hear it. Tell me your story. Tell me, where does justice end and revenge begin?
Cảm ơn tất cả các bạn đã xem video.